friend. Welcome to Heavy Metal History.
All right, guys, this week's episode of the Heavy Metal History Podcast, my guest with me is Sam Dean. Sam has been involved in the metal and hardcore scene for a decade or so, maybe longer, and he is currently...
I think a little bit longer.
A little bit longer, yeah. He currently does Blood, Sweat, and Beers and Plug Your Holes. So, Sam, thank you for doing the podcast, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is awesome.
Yeah, I was kind of glad you reached out on Reddit, and I was just like, dude, this is perfect. This is what I look for when we try to get people, and you know, it's nice having that like synchronicity kind of work out there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and it's like, you know, finding guests for this kind of stuff, especially if there's any sort of topical type of thing, you know, it's like you have a certain criteria that like your guests need to fall into.
Yep.
And you know, I even looking at some of these, I've had you know, a lot of podcasts are about. I mean, I guess the specificity or whatever the word is good, but it's also very hard when 99% of people doing podcasts are doing something that has nothing to do with the topical, the nature of what your particular podcast is. So it's really interesting that that you and I have such a similar, I guess, understanding or similar that we're so compatible, I guess, you know, with the history and metal and everything.
Yeah, we definitely have similar backgrounds. You were in a band, I did crew with a band, so it's like we both know the lifestyle that goes into that kind of thing too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's been a fun thing, you know, like since you've obviously always been kind of involved in the scene, I have too, and this is kind of my way of like continuing that. Because I met so many dudes through touring, it was like, well, man, like if I could just get them on to like share the history of their band and their stories and stuff, it's like,
well, it's a shame that you meet all these amazing people all over the country and you know, for some people the world, and the tragedy that is distance, you know, that problem with, you know, like, oh, that's cool, 90% of my friends live, you know, outside of driving distance, you know, it sucks.
Yeah, it's like a little traveling summer camp carnival. And you meet people, you make good friends, and then you see them again when you see them again, which, you know, some people I haven't seen in like a decade, others I've seen, you know, within the past couple of years. It's just, you never know when.
Right, and so much of it also, you know, are they even still touring? You know, it's a little easier with my friends that are still in touring bands. You know, They usually make it somewhere within driving range within a you know, once a year or something like that. But so many of us just don't travel like we once did. You know, I'm 35 now and have a daughter and a wife, and you know, the ability to get out on the road like I once did, even if I had the vessel in which to do it. But, you know, like my company does Warped Tour every year and has for 12 years. But you know, as life changed, I stopped being the one out there. So that ability to get, you know, to have FaceTime with friends is, you know, it's a big bummer, but being able to do, you know, technology has definitely increased that, the connectivity of the world and being able to just have a good conversation.
Yeah. Speaking of Warped Tour, this is going to be the final year for it. Like, how is that going to affect you in terms of like how you get your stuff out there? Because I know Warped Tour is only one medium, but you know, it's a pretty big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a little bit of nuance to that, I guess, but. So, first of all, I'll preface all of this with I don't think Warped Tour is over.
Okay.
I think Warped Tour, as we know it, is going to change. Even the wording that their publicity and press releases have used sort of implies that this is going to be the last full. I think their wordage exactly was this is going to be the last full U.S. Warped Tour, which tells me that Warped Tour as a title, as a name, is probably going to stick around. But it's just going to be probably on a smaller scale, maybe something similar to what Riot Fest was with, you know, maybe 5 markets doing a weekend instead of single dates. I think I find it I would bet money on the fact that there will be at least a Warped Tour in California next year. And, you know, do they change the name from Warped Tour to just Warped? I don't know, but that's all up to them. But I don't think it's over by any stretch. As a strategy for my company, you know, I'm not any sort of business genius. I spent the better part of my late teens and 20s touring in bands, and when that was over, I didn't know what else to do. So, you know, I just did what any idiot would do and just did the thing he knows to do the best, and that was get my company out on tour. And so Warped Tour was massively important to that. Our first Warped Tour was 2007, and we knew right away that we needed to be part of this thing, and we started doing other festivals, and you know, like I mentioned yesterday, you know, New England Metal Fest. We even did we went to Australia a couple of times to do Soundwave,
nice.
Which is tragically no longer a thing. Which is one of my favorite things we've ever done. There's just something to be said about watching Metallica on the other side of the planet, you know, and then a lot of these other festivals, like these small ones that are all over the country, have just slowly started disappearing, and or becoming not financially viable. So we've kind of, the past 3 or 4 years, we've kind of dialed it back anyway. So and as the company has grown online, the financial and promotional importance of festivals has definitely changed. So we definitely prioritize them differently. But Warped Tour always has had a sweet spot. And, you mentioned kind of this idea of summer camp. And Warped Tour, it's jokingly, the entire time I've been there, it's always jokingly been called the, punk rock summer camp. And you really, that's exactly what it feels like. You spend 2 months with the same group of assholes doing the same terrible fucking thing every day. And, not that it's terrible, it's bittersweet. It's like, it's the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, but it's so gratifying at the end. And so I'm going to miss that. But the strategy as far as business goes, I would say that doesn't change a whole lot for us, just because our company is I guess our company has just grown into other promotional avenues. Yeah. And I think our demographic has as well.
And I figured too, if you guys have been on Warped Tour for that long, like, people pretty much know who you are now, and like they know your product well enough to excuse me, know that you're a mainstay of like the tour now.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely hope so, because I definitely harken back to brands like Hurley and things like that when I was a kid, and how their involvement in music was so important. But at the same time, the best thing that I can ever hear from someone is that they've never heard of Plug Your Holes, because it means that there's still growth.
Yeah.
So that's a huge thing for me. Is we've been insanely fortunate. We ship out thousands of orders a month, and when I started this in my 1-bedroom apartment, almost 12 years ago, I didn't even think that was. I didn't think that was fathomable. That was such a pipe dream that I never thought it could happen. So then to get to that point and still see growth, it is massively rewarding.
Yeah, because there's new people going to that every year. I mean, even myself, like I've literally never been to a Warped Tour. I could have went last year, but I just didn't want to. I didn't want to deal with it, to be honest. Like, it's just so big. I'm not really into those kind of like bigger shows like that. But there's
sure. And I think that even your tone there is kind of reflective of the way that a lot of people are. I think most people would rather spend $20 to go see the 4 bands that they really want to see in a venue where they can, you don't have to drive. Usually Warped Tour is out on the outskirts of town, whereas Warped Tour, I think, there's something lost in the enjoyment of spending your entire day in 106-degree heat, sweating, and only seeing 30-minute sets with poor lighting. So I get the sentiment, especially as more bands tour more aggressively, and the likelihood of you seeing some obscure band is dramatically higher than it was maybe when we were kids.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's still cool that people go to shows like that, and it's a whole different beast, that's for sure. I just think my personal enjoyment is like in a little bit smaller of a venue with the bands I legit want to see. But then, like, there's room for discovery too. That's the good thing about Warped Tour, because there are so many different bands. You might find something new that you weren't going to be into.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I mean, and I think that's one of the best. I've always looked at it that way, and I grew up. So I didn't go to, as a fan, I never went to Warped Tour. Mm-hmm. I was pretty involved in like Christian music when I was younger, and so I started going to Cornerstone Festival. I'm originally from northern Minnesota, which really didn't get much for touring bands, especially bands that I wanted to see. And so going to this festival like Cornerstone, or going to something like Sunshine in Minnesota, was it was basically an all-you-can-eat buffet of killer music, And I went there to discover. I mean, I discovered Norma Jean at Cornerstone. I discovered Hopesfall at Cornerstone. And even bands that later on, they might not be bands that I listened to, but just the understanding of seeing where the music scene is going, you could do it in one spot. Whereas so I feel that same way about Warped Tour, but the music has become so much more accessible than it was when we were younger. So I think most people would rather just sit on Facebook or YouTube and just try to discover new bands than go out there and sweat it out.
Yeah, Cornerstone. So that's really interesting you mentioned that. So the band that got me kind of started touring, they were kind of like a staple here in the southern like kind of Christian metal scene, and they played Cornerstone a whole bunch.
Okay, what band's that?
With Faith or Flames.
Okay, I remember the name, but loosely.
Yeah, they did like 2 albums, and then we did a tour in 2008, and then they just never really kept going after that. Mm-hmm. But at the same time too, like they all kind of started not wanting to be involved in the Christian metal scene. I think that was part of it too, and they got kind of stuck with that name, and Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know the whole specifics about it. I haven't talked to my buddy Weatherford about it in depth, but I remember they would play Cornerstone like almost every year, and they played the generator stages.
Oh yeah. I mean, and that was like, I think that's something that is truly a moment in time that will never happen again. But I remember, we're good friends with this band called Flatfoot 56, who's like a Chicago, like kind of Celtic punk band, and their church would have one generator stage, and then another friend would have another generator stage, and then we'd be slotted to play on like a real stage, and in one day we'd play 3 sets, be sweating our asses off. But because of that tenacity, the next 2 months of tour was awesome, because all those Midwest kids that came to Cornerstone and Sunshine would then be coming out and be like, you got to see this band, you got to see this band, you got to, like, they'd buy the shirts. It was awesome to experience that, because realistically I would play in front of more people at one Cornerstone than I would on like a 2-month tour, when we were starting, especially very early on, when only 25 or 50 kids are coming to every show every night, but you're playing in front of 2,500 on the Rock for Life stage, or the HM stage, and that's a big fucking deal.
Yeah. That's the thing about that whole Christian metal scene, is like they're probably some of the most supportive in terms of like, like really buying the music and going to the shows, and just making sure that the bands kind of stay alive, whereas I think every other scene kind of just like eats itself alive a little bit.
Oh, I agree. Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's kind of love it or hate it. The Christian music scene definitely was its own scene. Yep. There's only a few bands that really crossed over. They crossed the lines. I think Zao was probably one of the first that I remember really being well received on both sides of the aisle. Mm-hmm. But the Christian music industry now is nothing like what it once was. You just don't have that support, and I think it's rare that you even get a band kind of outwardly calling themselves a Christian bands that's in the metal or punk scene. I think it's kind of tamed down a little bit in that regard. And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it got pretty weird there for a minute. There are some bands that I think went maybe, it's hard to say too far, because you never know until it comes down later. But there were bands that I think went further than necessary, and it became more of a theatrical thing than it was actually heartfelt emotion. And that was always frustrating to see. Like, I don't like theater in that sense. If I play music because it's coming from my heart, not because I want to sell you on who I am, or this soapbox or this stage. I don't want to. I don't want to boost myself up with this idea of self-importance or whatever, and understanding, there's a couple of bands in particular that I think like almost made themselves cult-like, that I was not a very big fan of that approach.
Well, it was interesting too, because you had a lot of bands in trying to get into that scene that would claim being a Christian band for like their first album or first 2 albums, and then they would go to some other label when they built their fan base up, and they're like, yeah, actually we weren't ever Christian at all, like it was just a ploy. And it's like, damn, like you guys took advantage of like a huge group of fans. And the thing is too, like people still kind of went with the bands after that too, which is
without a doubt. I think we've already talked about Zao. I think Zao is a good example of that. I don't think there was necessarily like I don't think it was necessarily a malicious choice to deceive, but I think the path that they followed, I think there's a lot of I think all of us Christian kids were a little too naive. I remember, even just something as simple as seeing them smoke cigarettes at Cornerstone, I was just like, how could they? Meanwhile, and then 2 years later, I'm, buying a pack a day. So, I think the naivety of it all, but it also, I think, kind of like broke that bubble for a lot of Christian kids. So I think that might have even helped. But, I know there's certain bands, like one that comes to mind is Further Seems Forever, huge bands that is still one of my favorite bands to this day.
Yeah.
And they basically were like, yeah, we're in a Christian label, but we were never a Christian band. And it was pretty open about it from the get-go. But then the bands like the Agony Scene is a band that comes to mind, where
that was the one.
I feel like they absolutely
yeah,
like they just milked it. They absolutely milked it. And we've even overheard conversations of bands that have been friends of ours over the years say, something to the effect of one band will say, oh man, we should have been a Christian band, we'd be signed by now. And another band would be like, that's why we are a Christian band, and that sucks to manipulate the system like that, but it is what it is. There's always going to be somebody doing it.
Yeah, it was a weird thing too, because like I'm not really super religious myself, but I still appreciate the music for what it was. And living in the South, that's kind of like the only bands we would get around here as far as like metal.
Mm-hmm.
So
where in the South exactly?
I live in Chattanooga.
Okay, yeah. I remember a few bands in the area. So I remember, but most down in like Johnson City, like was it the Showdown?
Yep, Showdown. That's a big one.
I think Living Sacrifices from down there.
Yeah.
And
Within.
Okay, yeah.
They were kind of a bigger one, but.
And you're not too far away from Atlanta with bands like Norma Jean.
Yep.
All those solid state bands that seem to just flow out of there.
Yeah, I remember seeing Norma Jean when they were still ludicrous.
Oh yeah, me too. That was so I didn't see him down there. So you probably saw him even earlier than I did.
Yeah.
But I saw him at Cornerstone in 1999 or 2000, and they were on Take Hold Records because Take Hold hadn't been absorbed by Solid State yet. And it was a pretty impressive show. I mean, I was kind of blown away, and you just knew instantly that they were going to be something.
Yeah, even for like kind of like the explosion of metalcore or whatever you really want to call it, Norma Jean's sound was still like light years different from what a lot of other bands were really playing at that time in terms of metalcore. They didn't rely super heavy on breakdowns as much as most metalcore bands, but they had like that weird dissonant kind of like lead guitar that made the band sound the way they did. And it was really spastic, almost like Botch and Coalesce.
Right, and I think that's exactly the band I was going to go to as far as where they take their influence from. Is as going back later, and listening to bands like Converge and Scarlet and Botch, I was like, oh man, I see where Norma Jean gets it from, and I think they all kind of influenced each other to some degree. But Botch kind of seems to be like the grandfather of that sound. But yeah, it was a pretty powerful time because it went from being like two steps and breakdowns and shit sounding like Buried Alive and Figure Four to this really chaotic spastic kind of thing. And the only thing I'd ever heard before that was that spastic was stuff like Dillinger Escape Plan or maybe The Locust or something. And at the time I wasn't a big fan of that because it didn't have enough order. And I think that like Norma Jean, especially with like Bless the Martyr, really took that chaos and that dissonance and those just ugly noises and made them into something that was like a really it felt from the heart. It felt like what feeling like punching a wall sounds like. It had that just absolute raw energy that I think very few people have been able to capture.
Yeah, and that's why they're still around today. I mean, even though their sounds changed quite a bit, they're still going pretty strong. I mean, that last album was pretty decent. Couldn't really say a bad thing about it.
Right. So my last guest, so episode number 4 on Blood, Sweat, and Beers, Josh Barber was the guest, and he's the producer of both of the last 2 Norma Jean records.
Nice.
And Corey from Norma Jean is going to be on an upcoming episode as well. So if you like Norma Jean, hey, check that out. But that process, I was fortunate enough to be in the studio with them for a couple days on that record, and I was up in somewhere in Minnesota. It's where Nirvana recorded In Utero. It's at Pachyderm Studios. It's in Cannon Falls, Minnesota, about an hour south of Minneapolis. And just the things, and this whole complex is so gorgeous. It's like separate recording studio as a building, and then this big house that has a pool and shit in it, and it's right on this like little streamy river, and the whole thing was it's a perfect place to write a record. And getting in there with those guys and watching them fuck with mics and they wanted a certain eerie sound, so they put a microphone in the middle of the pool so that they could get the noise off of all the concrete when they're getting feedback. It's a pretty awesome experience to be in that when you see somebody creating art. And I agree that like though Norma Jean is an entirely different band, they are still very, very good at what they do.
Yeah, they still don't sound like really any other band. That's like the one thing I can give them credit for is like even it's changed, it's still not really like anything else, and that's hard to do these days because I feel like there's a lot of stuff that just sounds so similar,
right, with any
genre.
Bands that stay sounding the same. How many bands can you think of that sound the exact same for 5 records? It's like and sometimes that's cool, but at the same time it's like I want evolution, I want a little bit of growth, and I think that Norma Jean grows. They don't change, they just evolve.
Yeah, I think the only band, off the top of my head that I can say sounds the same is probably Cannibal Corpse. I don't think they've changed their sound in well over a decade or so.
Yeah, they definitely have a formula. Yeah. I think like when I think of a band that like I think you get a little bit more of it in when you stray outside of metal, because I think at the heart metal is a genre that is designed to push the limits. And so naturally as these guitar players get better and better, you're going to end up with different sounds. And I think like some of the Gent stuff that comes out, like I'm not a huge fan of Gent, so I can't tell you the difference between the first Faceless record and the third Faceless record, but of bands that like I think that really sound the same from over the course of 5 records is a lot of like the pop punk bands and just straight up poppier music, where I think, especially if they've had success early on, it sounds like they really just try to hold that in a bottle and just try to create the same record over and over again, hoping to get a single that pops. Even a band that I love like MXPX or Newfound Glory, it's like the changes are a lot more incremental than they are with some other genres of music where, from record to record, some hardcore bands and some metal bands sound like two different bands entirely.
Yeah, Newfound Glory is definitely another one that I think they sound pretty similar in terms of their sound, but they've grown a little bit, but you still know you're listening to a Newfound Glory song. I mean, that...
Yeah, absolutely, no doubt.
Yeah.
I 100%.
So, we're talking about all these genres and kind of like the beginnings of like a lot of these scenes. For you, since you kind of got into metal, what's some things that kind of struck you to get into the genre? Like, what's some first records or bands that you took notice of and you're like, I'm into this?
Okay. Well, I had a really good friend. Well, he's still a really good friend. His name's Phil Roper, and he was always a drummer and was always in punk rock bands and then later on hardcore bands. And as much as I loved him as a friend, I hated his fucking music. Not so much the stuff he created, but he was always listening to, he was into a lot of Christian metal and hardcore at the time. So he was listening to like Mortification and Living Sacrifice and Embodiment and things like that. And I just remember being like, this is shit music. Put on some fucking MXPX, and it was, and so I felt that way for a few years, and I got really into like a punk rock band called Crash Dog, and which I talk about like how massively that changed my life on my friend Jerry's podcast called This Is My Jam, where I basically break down how that one song changed my life, which is, so if you have a chance to listen to that, it's like 15 minutes or something. But the thing I think that got me into metal was one record. It was called, the band was Focal Point, and the record is called Suffering of the Masses. And when that like opening riff came in, it's like, and I was hooked like from the first time I heard it. And I didn't care that it was screamy music, per se.
Yeah.
But from that point, I started to appreciate the other elements of what made good metal, and like the emotional attachment, like the emotion behind it. It changed everything for me. And from that point on, so those dudes that were in Focal Point, I think they only put out one record, but they went on to create Training for Utopia, a band that I absolutely adore, and they only put out one record, I think, and then those guys went on to form a band called Demon Hunter. I was never a big fan of Demon Hunter, but those other two were very, very influential in my music, my musical choices. And so I did my best to find, I'd been in like pop punk bands and stuff before that, and I just did my best to find some dudes who wanted to, I don't know, let me scream into a microphone and act a fool. And I found some a few years later, September of 2000, I think I started Fornown. And yeah, we certainly weren't very good at first, but we tried real hard, and it just kind of grew from there. And then I definitely remember these pivotal bands that always, there's bands that came out that changed the way that I looked at what could be done with music. Bleeding Through is one of them. The first time I heard Rise, I was like, holy shit, like this band just sounds like they drove a bulldozer through your house. It was so intense, and it wasn't like that heavy. It wasn't like listening to No Innocent Victim, or it wasn't like listening to Bury Your Dead later on. It was like they tore it. I mean, they had that like real Slayer style drumming with like this more Gothenburg, At the Gates style riffage, with just this mean fucking vocals, and so it just was so powerful, and it absolutely changed the way that I looked at music. Bands like Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, Poison the Well, and even later on Under Oath, like the Changing of Times era, really changed so much. So these are kind of like, I kind of define my musical journey as chapters of like what could be what could be, how hard you could push the envelope and what the genre even means. And I still see bands do that to this day. I mean, there's a couple bands that have come out in the last few years that have really impressed me. I think a lot of people discredit them, but I really am impressed with what Motionless in White does. I'm really impressed with that one record that Let Live had, at least that first half. I thought, man, here you're hearing something that might be a game changer, and then it kind of unfortunately went nowhere. So I'm just constantly being encouraged by like what continues to come out. But I will say that one thing that kind of comes up in my podcast a lot is I feel that there's just not a lot of new bands out there, and that always discourages me. And I don't know why. I have some speculation as to why there's not new bands, but god damn it, if you're some guitar player, some bass player, drummer, whatever, if you want to scream into a microphone about how mad you are at something in the world, just go fucking do it. That's I think the most frustrating thing is like, nobody. I was too stupid to know that I shouldn't be doing this, because like there's no end game. It's like I think nobody was making money screaming into a microphone, and I think the first time the only money making song probably that existed back then that made any money was probably Faith by Limp Bizkit, so there was no feasibility of this being your career, but we didn't care. It didn't fucking matter. We weren't good enough to go on tour, so we just forced people to let us play their fucking houses, and eventually, you do that 100 times and eventually you're kind of good at it. And that was that grinded out kind of mentality. And I think I see all these bands, and like with the exception of bands like Knocked Loose and maybe a couple other bands, there's just very few young bands coming up, and that really discourages me. So,
I think there's like a split mentality right now that like a lot of younger bands think they're going to go on tour and make money, and then there's the other ones that are like, no, you're not going to make any money doing this. You're just going to have to like enjoy it for what it is as long as you can. I guess kind of case in point, I was reading that article about Periphery where he's like, yeah, we did this 5-week-long Europe tour. We didn't make any money, and we're supposed to be like this big, huge band, and we don't make money. Like, what do you want from us? We can't make a living. And I guess that's true to some extent. Pretty much everybody I know that's in a band, like they don't necessarily make like a living. They still have things they have to do in between tours, but at the end of the day, they still are playing music. They're out on the road. They're putting out records, and I think that's what matters more than worrying about making money or making a living.
Yeah. Well, then, and the thing too is that like you'll never get to the point if you're not willing to work hard enough to get to the point where you will make money. You never will. You've already lost. So if this is your passion, pursue it, but don't think for a second anything is owed to you. And but if you don't try, you'll certainly never win. And I think a really good example of a band that has just done an absolute fucking bang up job at becoming, or truly being themselves, but also making a career out of it is A Day to Remember.
Yeah.
And these guys, their first U.S. tour was the Christian band Foreknown I was in. It was our last tour. We kind of broke up on that tour, but it was us and Blessed by a Broken Heart headlining, and A Day to Remember is our full U.S. 6-week opener. And watching those guys then, and then seeing them now, they were just in town a couple days ago, maybe a week ago or something. And they still love each other. They're like still good friends. They still grind it out. They work their asses off. They write good fucking music. They sell a lot of records, and they don't have to work when they get home. But dude, that tour was 15 fucking years ago.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's like, don't think this shit happened overnight. I think even one of those things, even when I started Plug Your Holes, the contacts and stuff that I had when I started the company were hugely a part of the bands. It was hugely a part of because I knew so many bands, and so when I needed a band to post on their MySpace to help me get my company going, they would. But that shit doesn't start overnight. So you got to go out. You got to you got to constantly be growing this thing, this brand, this person, and your contacts, not to use people, but because friends help friends. And you know what? It's a pretty tragic thing if you live your entire basement, you live your entire life noodling away in your guitar in your basement. I would say that don't think about the money. Just think about doing it. But if you do it aggressively and you do it right, you're probably going to make money as a consequence somewhere down the line.
I think too, A Day to Remember, if you look at all of like the strife they kind of had to go through with Victory Records, and they came out on top. Luckily, like very many bands can afford to try and go up against a record label that's like fucking them over really bad and winning. And then not only that, going from winning that to being like, okay, we're gonna self-release this record, watch what happens. Biggest record they've ever done. Like they took a huge chance in doing that, and it's crazy to see that happening, but good too. Like it's really good, that the fans will support a band like that and just be like, yeah, we'll pay for your record, like whatever. It's same thing with Protest the Hero,
and it all seems so authentic too. Yeah, exactly. Protest the Hero, good example. Like, there's at never any point do you feel that that's their goal. Like their goal is to put out an authentic product.
Yes,
and they take the risk because they're confident that hey, we've put our fucking hearts and souls into this, whether it's on a label or not. You get to choose whether it's good. So take it, and you choose whether or not we're going to sell 100,000 records or 1 million records or whatever. And I think that's massively important. I was really, also encouraged when Nine Inch Nails did that a few years back, where he just said basically fuck labels. And, to some degree he's saying pay me my money. But at the same time he's saying why I put my heart and soul into this. My fans love it. Why do I need a middleman? And I understand that. I absolutely understand that.
Yeah, I'm seeing that a lot more with bands. Like they're shying away from labels and just self-releasing everything or self-funding through like crowdfunding, whatever it is, or just not even doing crowdfunding and just paying for it themselves and trying to recoup everything. It's nice to see. I was talking to my friend Jamie, and he was like, yeah, we're never ever going to put anything out on a label again. We'd rather just self-finance it, put it out on our own accord, and go from there. And it's been the most successful thing we've done. I was like, that's fucking great to hear. Like, you know, if cutting out the middleman is what's working for you, then don't ever go back. Like, why? Just let the fans support the music.
Yep, and I've been on both sides now. I've never been on a major label, so I've been on, you know, relatively okay sized labels like Blood and Ink, which is kind of like upstreams to Face Down. And the thing I'll say about that, that it's kind of looking back at it, you know, they would buy magazine ads that I can't even really tell you whether they generated sales or not. They'd put our CDs in Hot Topics, and we sold some. But the real place that we always sold records was on the road. Yep. And so when I started, when we started Knowing to Speak Of, we originally also signed to Blood and Ink, and then convinced the label to release us because there was some distribution issues, and we're just like, hey man, we don't want to sit in this record for another 6 months. So we took that record and we made more money and sold half the amount of copies that my previous band's full length did. So it's like, I mean, I not even just by a small margin. I think we sold something like 3,000 copies of that Knowings record and made like 8 times more than I ever did off of the Foreknown one that sold 6,000 copies. Huh. So, you know, it was massively important. Not to mention we didn't give a shit if you downloaded it, burnt it from a friend, threw it on a friend's iPod, because at the end of the day, I'd rather you be at the show and know the fucking words than worry about you giving me $10. You know what I mean? So that was hugely important to us, just for the fan experience in general. I want people to enjoy the music that I'm creating, not necessarily put money in my pocket. And you know, and the thing is, if you're successful at the first one, you're probably going to be more successful at the second one. You know, when people have no reason not to have your music, they're probably going to be a lot more committed to your band in the long run. So I know that was hugely important for me, and knowing to speak of the success that we did have.
Yeah, so your last record you did with them was in 2008, and that's kind of when I started touring. Were you guys running into, when you're selling records on the road, the name that became very synonymous when you were keeping track of sales was SoundScan?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so did you see bands like fudging their numbers to try and get like more sales on the road when they're really selling like 5 copies of a CD and, you know, you're writing in like 20?
So it's kind of hard to do. So I've seen it, but they usually get caught. So if you really want to fuck with SoundScan, there's a couple ways to do it. And I'm not going to name bands that have done this, but trust me, they're bands that you've heard of.
Yeah.
So the one band, I've actually seen a couple bands do this. One of the best ways to fudge your SoundScan numbers is to go into a Best Buy when your record is out in its first week. Back in the day, your records would always be $7.99 the first week.
Yep.
And you buy every single record at every single Best Buy that you come across while on tour. And then you take those and you sell them at your show at night, so you double scan the entire record. So every record is getting double scanned, basically, because they're going to get it scanned at Best Buy because you bought it from them. But it's $7.99, so you're still able to sell it at the show for $10 and make a profit, even though you probably, if you bought it through your label, would have got it for $5. So that's one way. Another way is, so I was in a band a couple years ago called Crimson Tigers. And it was just like kind of a fuck around band that a couple of my buddies did. And a friend of ours who owns a label said, hey, I'll release this record for you. Just cause, you know, whatever. Mm-hmm. He's like, it's good music. You're not going to tour, but I'll, you know, hey, I know how to move records, so we'll do this. So what he would do, his company is a label called Streak Records, and if you went to Warped Tour between like 2006 and 2012, you've probably seen them. A bunch of shirtless guys trying to hustle you to buy records. What they would do is they'd take 3 CDs that were in cardboard sleeves, but they're printed. I mean, they're professionally printed CDs, but they're not in jewel cases. Mm-hmm. And those for young people who are listening who don't know what a CD is, it's a plastic thing that has music on it, and it used to be in a plastic case that would break all the time.
Yep.
And so the cardboard sleeves, you know, usually a little more indicative of it being like a shitty quality thing, but they would take 3 records, you know, 2 of the other bands on the label and our record, and they'd say, okay, buy this and a shirt for $20. But you get 3 records, you get a bunch of stickers, you get all this other shit. So they just bundle the bejesus out of it. Well, for something to technically be a scan for SoundScan, I think somebody has to pay more than $5 for it. So what they would do is say that the shirt was free, the stickers were free, the patches were free, whatever else, it's free. But the 3 CDs are each $7.33 or whatever. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, they were able to get a SoundScans. Well, they moved 10,000 copies of our record that summer. So a band that couldn't get anybody to a show if they tried sold 10,000 copies of a record, spent 7 weeks on Billboard, and it's kind of just a silly little thing. It's like, so if you're able to manipulate the system that easily, the system probably is broken.
Yeah, it was interesting encountering that, and like the story that I always heard of the one band that got like really caught for it, and it's out there, so I don't mind saying it, but like It Dies Today like really fudged their numbers for the Cative Choir record.
Yeah, those guys we're pretty good friends with ours at the time, and we'd always just come up with new names for them, like It Tries to Play, or some other things that might be offensive. But yeah, good dudes. But yeah, they absolutely fudged numbers. And when SoundScan, when the company behind SoundScan, Nielsen Ratings, when they realized that there was more records sold than records produced, they're like, you guys are fucking up.
Yep. Yeah, that was. I mean, I applaud them for at least trying. But it was interesting, man. I don't know. It's one of those weird things. Like, everybody's on the honor system, but there's always going to be that one person or group of people that are like, nah, we can get away with this.
Right. And dude, and the thing is, most of them do. Like, I know a ton of bands. I mean, I can probably think of somewhere upwards of 30 different bands that have tried different schemes, and It Dies Today is only one of 2 that I know got caught. So it's like, it like this shit works. The problem, the big one, you got to make sure that you know where it's going to work. The reason it worked with that particular band that would buy from Best Buy was because they were on they were upstream to Universal. The amount of records produced were, in the hundreds of thousands, and they were able to do this under the radar. But at the same time, they're really just going for first week or second week sales. Yep. So because once you end up on the Billboard charts, it kind of becomes its own self-fulfilling prophecy. If you're on the top, especially back in the day. Right now it might be a little different. But let's say iTunes, for example. The same thing if you did that today with iTunes. If this podcast makes it to the new and noteworthy or the top section of the I guess suggested listens or whatever on iTunes, you're naturally going to get more listeners. But it takes so many listeners to get to the point where you can get free, it's this big thing. Like, that's why so many people who do podcasts are so aggressive about getting as many listens, likes, reviews as possible in the first 8 weeks, so you can get in the new noteworthy category. Yep. The same thing that's the same thing for bands. If you can get noticed, you're going to call up, XYZ booking agency or agent and be like, hey, my band is currently number 7 on the Heatseeker charts and number 44 in rock, and we want to go on tour with your band, whatever band you represent. And that guy's going to go, oh, fuck yeah, okay. Cool. New band, but clearly people like you, so let's get you on this tour. And that tour could be the difference between how much, like, you surviving on the amount of money you make that year as a band, so that you could actually go home to maybe an apartment, or whatever it might be. And the difference between you not being able to support yourself on tour because there's so little money out there and there's so many people trying to get it. So to think that people wouldn't cheat or manipulate the system, you're kidding me. Like, clearly people are going to do whatever it takes. It is a cutthroat world.
Yeah, and I mean, even so more nowadays, especially with like technology being so rampant, it's got to be much, much more difficult to like really get those first week numbers than it used to be like 10 years ago.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. I mean, and it's saturation's everything. So if 10,000 people tell me to listen to their record, well, how am I going to choose even which one I listen to? It's like even the idea of a magazine or Facebook ads. It's like, dude, I'm not gonna discover my next favorite bands from a fucking ad, like in a magazine I don't care about. It's just not how a lot of this happens, But if I already do know that band, so like Ice Nine Kills, like, okay, well, I'm looking through a record and Ice Nine Kills says, hey, a new record April 1st, which I don't know, so don't quote me on that. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna go, oh, cool, the boys have a new record coming out. But if I don't know your band name, if your band name is just like, I don't know, Succotash Prime, I'm gonna be like, I don't care, whatever. And so it's like that, getting your hooks into anyone is so hard that anyone will do anything to do it. And one of the big things is manipulating your numbers as best as possible to get on whatever tour you can get on, because that's where you actually get face time. Because if I'm on a tour with Every Time I Die, I know that there's 1,000 kids a night who might give a single shit about my band, and if I can get fucking 50 of them to come back to a show the next time I'm in this town, it's solidifying the future, my future in this band.
Yep, getting on those big tours is like always a huge like make or break thing, because expanding that audience, going from like playing 200 cap venues to like a 1,500 cap venue makes all the difference.
Oh, for sure, 100%. And on top of that, like, the game has changed a lot. And on my first episode at Alex, he's the longtime drummer of War of Ages. Mm-hmm. We talked about this a good bit too. But I think one of the things that's changed is, that old school thought of grinding it out on the road and trying to get on the right tours is kind of lost a lot of amongst younger musicians, because they see people putting out a cover of a fucking, I don't know who's famous, Bruno Mars, sure, putting out a cover of a Bruno Mars song, busting to the top of like the YouTube plays, becoming insta famous, but not even having a fucking band to go tour with. Right now, somebody here at Plug Your Holes, his significant other is the manager at a big venue here called the Truman. And for here, I live in Kansas City. And half the events that I've seen on their calendar are podcasters and YouTubers and like Suicide Girls and shit. And I never in a million years would have thought that would be what goes out on tour, but they also understand the benefit of it. But a lot of these kids today, they see people blowing up because whatever they did on YouTube or whatever they've done on Snapchat or something like that, and just forgot that it took hard work too. But those of us who are old, I guess, also understand that, that is just another tool to use in the toolbox, but it's not the only one. I definitely appreciate the amount of followers that my company and myself have on social media, and it makes starting something like a podcast a hell of a lot easier than starting from scratch. But do not think for one second that you can just set it and forget it, because nobody, you got to go out there and you got to reel people in, you got to get your hooks in them. And that's, to some degree, that's why I'm on this show. It's like anytime I can get a chance to talk to people, it's hugely important for me. But I'm hoping that a couple people that listen to this go, you know what? That guy talks a lot, but I can handle that. And you decide to go listen to me on my podcast, and likewise, if you're on mine, I want people to do the same thing for you. There's reciprocation.
Yeah, Sorry,
go
ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to close with this thought with that if you aren't grinding it out at every possible moment, then expect to go nowhere. And you can stay in your fucking parents' basement because nobody's going to hear you noodling on your guitar, or thinking of your profound ideas if you don't get out there and deliver them to the world. Because at least then, even if you suck, you at least get some feedback that somebody says, dude, you're full of shit, stop talking. Or, hey, you suck at guitar. But at least you go, oh, okay, maybe I should fucking practice something else. Maybe I should be more disciplined. Maybe I should grind this out a little differently than just, sitting there basically jerking myself off with my guitar. And I think that's very important for people to hear, because I definitely feel that's something that's lost right now with a lot of young people.
Yeah. Even from my end, starting this podcast, it's been a year that we've been doing it, and we're still trying to grow it. And the only way I know how to do that is to go to shows and pass out flyers, or put some shit on some merch tables. And if I see somebody wearing a band shirt, I'll be like, hey, do you like podcast? I've had that dude on my show, check it out. And that helps. But the retention is kind of weird. Our biggest thing that we did this year, we went to those final Dillinger shows in New York, and
I'm fucking jealous,
dude. They were so good. I'll never ever forget that.
They're always blowing my mind. It's weird seeing a dude 10 years older than me make me look like a fucking pussy every fucking second of that set. There's no way now. Anyway, so congratulations on going to that show.
Oh yeah, it was amazing. And I have a co-host, and he lives in Australia. So he only has so much he can do in Australia because it's so spread out. With his country.
Right.
So I'm kind of doing all the legwork, and we went to those shows and we passed out a bunch of flyers and met a bunch of people, and we saw our numbers spike, and they've pretty much stayed fairly consistent since then. But it's just I have to pick and choose what shows I go to, and who to really tell about it. But it's work, and I'm enjoying it, and that's the fun part about doing this, man. Is getting people like you on, reaching out and networking, and it's just
yeah, for sure.
I would have never even thought to hit up you or anybody from that band, because we're still doing our history episodes,
right.
And shoot, what was that record you mentioned earlier? The Dudes and Demon Hunter were in originally.
Oh, Training for Utopia.
Yeah, so that's one of our records on this year because we're going into 1998.
Oh, fuck yeah.
And I am mega stoked to talk about that record, but trying to find information on it is literally impossible because there really wasn't, because they did one record and then that was it, and they went to do Demon Hunter. So I've been trying to reach out to the Dudes in Demon Hunter to see if one of them would come on and talk about that record. And
well, the Clark brothers are the two that are the most important, and they also own Asterisk Studio, so they're super busy. It's one of these big graphic design firms that does a lot of work for them. They've done Jessica Simpson. They've done when Jessica Simpson mattered. Yep. Jack White and the White Stripes and things like that. So I know they're super busy guys.
Oh, totally. It's always hit or miss with when we seek out guests, or even if we just try to send them a few email questions, that usually works a little bit better. But But yeah, man, like like 2008, like your band put out a record in 2008, so that kind of goes into like a lot of stuff we try to do on this podcast, which is to get into like the history of making a record, like when it was put out, all the stuff that went into it. So that's kind of what I want to hear about now is like when you guys, let's go back to 2007, 2008. Yeah, when you were like recording that final record, like where were you guys at in terms of like the bands? And just going into like that record.
Okay, so so No Wings to Speak of sort of started as a joke band that was called Time Is Due, and it was called Time Is Due because there used to be this Florida hardcore band called In Due Time, and it was kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke. We meant no offense by it; it wasn't anything like we hate those guys; they're great people. Sure, but it was just kind of like a funny little thing, just to be like kind of a we three of the members. So I wasn't included in that iteration of No Wings to Speak of. I had after Forknown. Winter and Doug, our drummer and bass player from Forknown, went out to start that kind of jokey band, and I went off to join a friend of mine's band, which is like more poppy stuff. They're a band called Jamestown Story. I played bass in them for about a year, and it was the first and only time I've ever been paid to play music. And I got home from that, and just wasn't working out, not for any bad reasons, just wasn't my thing. And that fall, the same fall I started Plug Your Holes, actually. I kind of met up with the guys and was like, "Hey, man, it was fun being in a band together." We hadn't at this point it had been about a year and a half since we had done Forknown, and we're like, "Hey, let's do the same lineup as this joke band, but let's have you do the vocals." And then our friend Brandon. I was like, "Fuck yeah!" Brandon and me are buds, and his brother would later go on to be the singer of After the Burial, and then eventually replace me and No Wings to Speak of. And the one thing we knew, so the bass player from Forknown moved to guitar in this band, but the drummer stayed the drummer, I stayed the vocalist. And we knew a couple things about the beginning of this band. One is we certainly did not want to be a Christian band. We didn't even want to hint at being a Christian band. There was nothing like that. We wanted a complete we wanted autonomy. We just didn't want to be like, you feel like there's restraints when you're in a Christian band. Here's what I can say, here's what I can't. And after my time, our drummer wrote a song called "Religious Rape." Then, if you read that out of context, and there's no Christian label or Christian fan that would give it any validation, they would dismiss it entirely. But "Religious Rape" is about how fucked up the religious sentiment is, and how he felt raped by religion. Not that it was this like terrible thing. It's a terrible thing, but for the exact reasons that people would assume that song title meant something different. So that kind of freedom was something that was absolutely paramount to our. For our cause. The second thing was we never want to not be having fun. So the second any of us are not having fun, members can come and go, but we don't want anybody in this for obligation. And the third thing is we wanted to be very selective about where we recorded. Forknown had unfortunately just not, it was in the early days of Pro Tools, and we made some unwise decisions with where we recorded our records, and unfortunately that led to us just not having a record that sounded the way we wanted it to sound. So we went with this for No Wings. We went with this guy named Marky Softitch, who I absolutely adore, and we really liked the sound that he was able to create for that record. So we went down to Minneapolis to record. I drank a lot of alcohol and screamed into a microphone in what would eventually become a nursery. So there's not a whole lot of glamour there, and so that which was super fun. I'm one of those guys. Get a couple drinks in me, I loosen up. I'm just too. I'm a pretty wound up guy. You can probably tell by listening to me talk very quickly. I just have kind of this, aggressive run at the wall kind of thing. But that fucks with my vocals because I need to take a step back and let timing and cadence and all this other stuff catch up. And so, and when you start recording at 10 in the morning and you finish at 10 p.m., you end up killing the whole bottle. So. I was going through about a bottle a day when I was doing my vocals, but it probably was one of the happiest times of my life. I mean, honestly, looking back, it was one of the best recording sessions of my life. It was the best recording session up to that point, for sure. And there was nothing. There was no pressure. There was none of that like Christian bullshit. There was no, we were signed to Blood and Ink at the time while we were recording. That felt good. Eventually, it kind of fell apart, but we just felt so good about what we were creating in that studio. And it was, absolutely just with those times that when you think of what being in a band is like, that those are the moments that you dream of. And so I was super thankful for that. After that record was done, mixed, mastered, was a couple problems with the sound of it. Not so much Marky's fault. I think that there was just a little bit of a miscommunication over how heavy we wanted it to be, and it came out sounding a little bit more like an As I Lay Dying mix than like a Meshuggah mix, and we really wanted that absolute low end. I mean, we were playing like drop G or some shit like that, like drop E. I don't know, like just something fucking miserable, and so there was a little bit of that. So like the band really wanted to rush in and get another record out.
Mm-hmm.
But our contract said that we couldn't release another record until 9 months after this record was released. And so we're like, okay, we finished recording in like, I don't know, September or something. And then we were supposed to release in November maybe. And just it kept getting pushed up. Eventually it had been pushed up by 6 months. And I called the person at the label. The person who originally started Blood and Ink was no longer even at the label. This was the person who was my closest friend there. So I called up somebody else at the label, and I was like, hey, I want to know what's going on, because we're just sitting here with our thumbs up our asses. And if we can't get this record out, we are basically done as a band.
Mm-hmm.
And his counter was, okay, you guys can leave the label. We want your recording budget back. I think we settled on half of it coming back to him. And that was that. We parted ways, and we put out our record on iTunes and download cards. And I don't even think we ever made a CD. I think we were so distraught by the time that came to an end that we're like, cool, any money you give us for this, we're fine with at this point. But we just want to get to the next chapter.
Yeah.
And so we did some tours on that record, where we were starting to put out new material, like some stuff that ended up coming out later. But then the EP, the 4-song EP that came out after that was recorded right after I left the band. So I left the band summer of 2009,
okay.
well on Warped Tour with my company. And it just started to become a thing where, like we said, if we're not enjoying it, it's time to leave. And I absolutely love everybody in that band to this day. Some of them are my absolute closest friends, but the weight of the company plus the band had kind of like weighed on me a little too hard at that point. Mm-hmm. And I stepped aside, and then Grant wasn't officially in the band. So Winter, the drummer, did the EP. So you're hearing on the EP, Winter and Brandon doing vocals on that, which is fucking badass, because Winter's always wanted to be a vocalist. He's always just been too good of a drummer for anybody to let him.
Yeah.
So it's like, so for him to have that opportunity to be able to put his mark on that in a way that he's never been able to do on any of the other records was outstanding. I was very, very stoked on that.
So when you guys are going to record, did you have everything written before you went into the studio, or was it like kind of still working on stuff while you're in the studio? Little column A, little column B. Okay.
I am somebody who very much enjoys creating in the studio. Mm-hmm. It's the most expensive way to go about doing it, and you really have to have somebody you trust. And musical projects I've done since then, I do with Josh Barber, the guy I mentioned earlier who did Norma Jean, because the music we create is the best music I've ever created. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I come into the studio with almost no idea, because Josh and I just the process is the best part. But when you're a younger musician, you don't have that kind of money. I mean, we're talking, a full length that you absolutely rush through and record over a weekend is, $2,500, $3,000. And so to get more time in the studio is really hard. To do something like what Norma Jean just did at Pachyderm Studios, where they can spend a month somewhere, it's very hard. And it's also hard on your life, because you have a job, or you need to be on tour, or all these other things. So a lot of what I've done has been months of practicing, writing riffs, playing in, when Forknown, we practiced in the basement of a church, and now we used to speak of, we practiced in our bass player's garage. And it just comes down to like, how many times a week can you practice? How many riffs can you write on this tour, and what can we make them into when you get back? And so with No Wings, we definitely came in, I'd say that record was about 75% complete.
Okay.
The good thing about that 25% that wasn't complete, though, is that when Marky Softitch, who recorded that record, really knows us and what we're going for very well. And so once you get in there with the producer, somebody who can put another set of ears on it, we're able to really produce so much of stuff for the record that wouldn't have been there without him. And then on top of that, you have these random wingers. There's a song that became one of our more popular ones to play live called "Standing in the Footprint of a Giant," and that song was written in 45 fucking minutes. In the studio, we're like, we have 9 tracks, let's get a 10th. We wrote that song out of one bass, out of one riff, and it transformed into that. Where another song like Addictions, that song took months and months to write, and so did some others, So there's definitely a combination of that kind of stuff. But I will say that going back to that, writing the entire thing in the studio, you're also put on the spot. You're put in the spot because if you can't get this done in this period of time, you're fucked.
Yep.
So, are you the kind of person who really shows who you are, or can really rise to the occasion when your feet are to the fire, or are you somebody who really needs that like clarity and the zone, that the peace of mind to write a record? And I'm somebody who probably operates a little bit better in chaos than I do tranquility. So I think that's maybe why the studio element is more preferred for me, because I love to get down to I love to create it out of chaos.
I love hearing things like that too, where it's like, oh yeah, we wrote this song in 45 minutes and, had this other one that took us months to write.
Right.
I mean, you never know how the inspiration is going to strike you. And like, just because something was written quicker doesn't necessarily mean it's worse or better than something else. And that's always the cool thing about music. And we read stories like that all the time too, where it's like, yeah, man, this song that's like huge for us, it was an afterthought, and
Yep.
that afterthought was like a hit for you guys, and that's cool to hear that. I like hearing stuff like that.
Yeah, I think that it is very hard for people who are any musician listening is going to understand this 100%. Any artist, I think, is going to understand this 100%.
Yeah.
When you put a ton of time into something, you don't see the beauty other people see. You know what I mean? So if all you know is what this once was, what it started at, the riff that you played in your attic 6 months ago and what it's become, you don't even see what it's become. You just see the pieces that put it together. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard for you to see the finished project and listen to it like, through, I guess, virgin ears, whereas, somebody else can come out and hear that song right away and go, that's a fucking hit. And so there's a couple of people in my life that I do know who can hear through the bullshit, and they can tell you, I've been spending this X amount of time writing this part, and it's great. But the majority of the people I know who know when they've hit it, and they know when they've been successful, or you wrote a successful song or wrote something that's going to be well received, is they back off and stop fucking with it.
Oh yeah. That's a fine line too, man.
without a doubt, because before you know it, hey, this soup needs a little more salt. You add a little more salt. Hey, I think it needs a little more pepper. I need to add a little more pepper. Hey, it needs some more vegetable. It needs some more spice. It needs more salt. It needs more salt. It needs more salt. All of a sudden, it's not edible. But you've dumbed down your sense of taste so much by continuing to add the salt or continuing to add the spice. By the time somebody else's fresh tongue hits it, there's nothing left but the flavors that you didn't even realize that you were basically overdoing the entire time. And so when a song is good, it's best to let it be. Maybe come to it months later, or let a producer kind of like guide your hand on that. But getting some virgin ears on it is always very big. And some of those songs that we spent months writing turned out to not be that good a song. Some did, some didn't. So
yeah, I mean, it's hit or miss. With that kind of stuff, especially when you're trying to write like 10, 12 songs. There's going to be some bleed over too. You're going to take riffs from other things that you started that go into like another song, and it's like a puzzle almost. That's the way I always looked at it too. Is like you got pieces that you're trying to put together, and sometimes they fit, sometimes you got to make them fit, and sometimes it doesn't fit.
Oh, for sure, 100%. And you can't be afraid to throw it away too. It's like I think that's one of those hard things early on with any art is just knowing that you put so much time into something. To just be like, fuck, this is all garbage. And you'll never be able to look at it any other way, so stop trying, just get rid of it and move on. Try something new. It's huge. It takes discipline, though.
So something you mentioned that I kind of want to get back to for a second, you kind of mentioned having a little bit of problems with like the release of the album. After putting all that work into it, did that like kind of get your spirits down about like, doing all this work and you're having trouble getting the record out and, where do you go from here? Like, how did that kind of affect you in terms, I mean, you said you walked away from the band, but I mean, like, how did it affect you and the band and like just really wanting to kind of continue doing music in general with that looming over you?
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the first thing I'll say about that is with a band, time is everything. Mm-hmm. When you put out a record and you're the next whatever sound, if this record sounds like nothing nobody's ever done, you want to get it out before somebody does do that sound. So you want to be you want to establish the archetype.
Yeah.
When you have a record that is being held up for months and months and months, and you've played shows and gone on tours and people have heard these songs, you're in a constant fear that by the time this thing comes out, it's going to be irrelevant. So there's that.
Especially back in that day.
I mean, like, yes.
That was like the heyday of MySpace, so things were like really starting to ramp up in terms of like what people had access to musically.
Exactly, 100%. And the other main thing is you get sick of playing the same fucking set every night. So we're wanting to bring out new songs, but these are songs that are going to be on a record that comes out after the one that's not even out yet.
Yeah.
So we're like, fuck, this sucks. Like, so we have, 4 songs written that like maybe we'll throw one in a set or something just for fun, but you start to lose energy and passion and drive, and there's nothing to push. There's no record to tell the people that are at the show, hey, go back and check out our shirts, I guess, but you can't fucking listen to those. Mm-hmm. And so you start to get you definitely start to get disheartened. And we were really fortunate. That band was playing shows, like good sized shows. We'd gone on some fucking awesome tours, but without any product to put forward to get people to come back. So that really sucked. We had a couple. I think at a certain point we became desperate, and we had 2 songs that were on the full length that we had the demo versions of, and we would just like fucking burn discs in the van on between drives, just anything to get something in these people's hands. And like I said earlier, if you get music in their hands, whether it's free or they've paid for it, you have a higher likelihood of them coming back. And it was very frustrating. It was very frustrating to feel like you have a team of people at a label that has your best interest in mind. That and clearly, what it felt like from our end was, so there's a lot of that. And we were angry. I mean, like, there was a lot of conversations. It would make us angry at each other, mm-hmm. because we would, be pissed about the thing, and then be like, something would come up like, hey, we should take this tour with, so-and-so. And it would be like, well, I don't even know why I'm fucking touring anyway, because we don't have a fucking record, like all of a sudden there's an argument. And so that stuff happens, and it was very frustrating. And then by the time we actually got the release out, it was just like, ugh, I guess it's here now, but it was so unconsequential to us at that point. It was just like, finally, it was just a relief that it was over, but there was certainly no celebration,
Yeah.
So that was all just a gigantic headache. And, I don't know if that weighed into the decision of me, like, being in the band or any of the sentiments between other band members and myself, or them amongst each other. But I know we definitely felt like we wasted a year of being in a band, and a year is not something that any band really has the luxury of wasting.
No, especially not having a record out and knowing you've already completed it and recorded it. That's got to be immensely frustrating. Like, I can't even imagine having to deal with that.
Yeah, and we were still doing festival circuits and like all this other shit. So we're playing in front of, we're getting really good crowds at just shows, but on top of that, we're getting really good crowds at festivals. We're playing in front of a couple thousand people, at these festivals, and you're like, cool. Like, these are a couple thousand people that could be future fans, but probably aren't now.
That's sort of thing that's really interesting to me about like doing this podcast and like looking into bands and what happened with, like, they put out 1-2 records and then like went away. Well, what happened? What was the thing that fucked them over? Whether it's massive lineup changes or, things with record labels or just the band not getting together or along well. And it's so unfortunate when you kind of like pull back the curtain a little bit and realize, like, this if one little thing could have gone different, maybe you guys would still be a band like putting out records now. Sure. It's super unfortunate to hear about stuff like that. But that's the game at the end of the day too. That's the shitty part of it.
Well, and the thing about the game too is just because I didn't get it doesn't mean somebody else didn't.
Yeah.
Of the guys in that band, we're all pretty close friends. I can't say I don't have bad blood towards any one of them. So none of us have, we all live in different places. Johnny lives in fucking New Jersey. Doug lives in Thailand.
Damn.
I live in Kansas City. Winter lives in Duluth, Minnesota. Waldy lives in Kansas City, but is moving back to southern Minnesota. The twins both live somewhere in the northern Minnesota area. You never really know where they're going to be. And, and Mikey lives in Minneapolis. So it's like, that's the lineup, that not all of us were in the band at the same time, but there's been a couple times we do reunion shows when Doug is back from Thailand, and we did some last summer, and all of us, like we didn't care that there was fucking 3 guitar players and 3 vocalists, and like we just didn't care. It was just, let's just do it.
Yeah, and I mean, the record is turning 10 this year. That's the cool thing about it. It's been 10 years since that came out, and I still think a lot of things that I'm noticing in the scene too, like people are really looking for, like, I guess the thing I call is like callback bands, or like, a certain sound. And I think if people find this record now, dude, they'll be stoked on it, because it's like, I didn't know this came out in 2008, and they're like, maybe they forgot about it, that it came out in 2008.
Or just weren't around. I think that's one of those things. Like, I even have callbacks in my life, going back to, earlier punk rock than when I was listening to it, going back to shit from the early 90s, the late 80s, even the 70s, like one of the things that I have jammed aggressively, the past few years is stuff like The Clash and
I fucking love The Clash, dude.
And going back and just understanding what came before you is super important. And even one band, speaking of what came before you, the record You Come Before You by Poison the Well.
Mm-hmm.
That's a record that I really didn't give much thought to, because I love Opposite December, I love Tear from the Red, but I wasn't a big fan of Tropic Rot, and so I never even gave it the chance to listen to You Come Before You. And I lived in Thailand for a year as well, and when I was over there, I would do a lot of street photography, and I would put on Opposite December. On the first thing from Poison the Well on Spotify is Opposite December, Tear from the Red split. It's like both records is one album re-release.
Yes.
And I would just put that on play, but then it would automatically go into You Come Before You, and that put me in like that. The sound of all of those 3 records puts me in such a zone that I am able to, just able to pursue like photography in a different way. Got me in a zone that is just one that I like to be in when I'm taking street photography. Like, when you're taking pictures of homeless people, and you're taking pictures of children selling lottery tickets and things like that on the streets of Bangkok. When you're taking pictures of dogs eating garbage. Mm-hmm. It's it just gets me in that area. But because of that, I started listening to that record, and this is only 3 years ago now. And you that throwback to something that you really didn't appreciate at the time is nice. It's a comfortable feeling, because it means it also tells you that there's sometimes music feels so stagnant, like there's nothing good and new out there. But there's so many things you've never even given a chance, that if you just go back and continue listening to things that you haven't had a chance to get into, you have a million favorite bands you just haven't discovered yet.
Yeah, I've really, especially within the past decade, had to get myself out of that own mentality of like, oh, this isn't what I like, so I'm not going to listen to it. Now I'll literally go listen to everything. Like, I just want to listen to music. I don't care what genre it is. I don't care if the band changed their sound. Like, I just love music so much, I want to listen to it, and I don't want to deprive myself of music.
Right.
I think the band for me that was like that was Misery Signals. Because,
I fucking love Misery Signals.
Yeah, so like when they got Carl in the band, I was like, I don't really know if I like this. Like, I just stopped listening to them. And then Controller came out, and like I will always like just kind of listen to the record just to see what it's like, whether it's good, whether I like it or not, or maybe don't listen to it all that much. I'll still listen to it. And I put on Controller, and I was like, what the fuck have I been missing since they did Mirrors? And and I immediately like never looked back. I was like, yep, I'm back into Misery Signals.
Exactly. Actually, I made before Noise to Speak Of, I made a pretty aggressive attempt to try out for that spot that Carl ended up getting, and it was I would have loved that. It's not so much that like in retrospect, I'm very happy with my life, and I think that's the one thing you talked about earlier. If one thing would have been a little bit different, where would you be right now? And I think that's pretty key to life in general. But I just want to preface it with, I am very happy, and so in retrospect, I guess I'm happy that I did not get Misery Signals, and I'm happy that certain bands broke up, if only because of where my life is right now.
Mm-hmm.
But man, did I think that was the end all be all. So went to a studio, recorded a song. Another friend of mine who do you know the band Everything Slow Motion, or the band Hands?
No, I'm not familiar with them.
Both are Face Down Records bands, but my buddy Shane Oshner is the front man for both of them, and he also did it, but we didn't know each other at the time, and so years later we compared our recordings, just kind of fun stuff, kind of pipe dream type stuff. But the thing is, I think that is a testament to you have to be the kind of person who's willing to try, even if you have a snowball's chance in hell, you'll never get anything if you don't try. And so I tell people this all the time. I don't know, just when people ask me for advice about things, that the only failure is never trying at all, because you might fail 20 times, but the 21st time you succeed, you're gonna end up in a better place than never trying the 21 times. I think it's like super frustrating. It's like it makes me feel so good that people like you and like that anybody out there is doing podcasts, creating music, going out there and doing something that, you know, a lot of people just say, well, nobody's gonna listen to you talk. Nobody's, you know, like fuck off. You know, I remember my stepdad telling me something when I was younger, and this is when I was in one of my first bands, and I don't think this band ever even toured, but he said, "What makes you think you're so special?" Huh. You know, and he meant it seriously. He didn't mean this in a insulting way, even though he was rather insulting. But he really asked it in the sense of, well, this band is big because of this reason, or this band's big because of this reason. What makes you think you're so special? You're some punk ass kid from Duluth, Minnesota. And I'm like, well, I think what makes me so special is that I'm willing to try. You know, I think the ability to fail is one of the most underrated skills in the world. And you need to be able to fail, and you need to be able to fail a lot. And then you need to remind yourself that it's only a failure if you didn't learn how to get better. And that's when that 21st attempt succeeds. But if you just sit there and listen to people like my stepdad say, what makes you think you're so special? Dude, you've already fucking failed. And that sucks. And like, that's why I think podcasts is one of the greatest formats in the world for communicating ideas and getting people to have a like-minded conversation, even if you're not a participant in the conversation and you're a listener. Listening to this shit is so important, because you need to know that there's other perspectives out there than fucking Jimmy Fallon. Yeah. You know, you need to hear the reality. You need to hear about how hard it was. And the thing is, I'm not this super successful dude in the sense of, like, you know, I'm not Casey Neistat. I'm not fucking Joe Rogan. Like, but these people were also in my place at some point in time. They were in the same spot that I'm in right now, and none of them would have got there. They would have just said, well, I'm never going to be Joe Rogan. Well, yeah, exactly. You're not going to be, because you are not willing to try.
Yeah, that's something over the past couple of years I've had to really like make myself realize, is that, you know, especially in my 20s, I was like really like, well, if this didn't work, I failed, then it's no good. Now it's like, well, how hard did you work at it? You know, why did it fail? So, right. You know, I'm going to be 31 in like a week. So I'm really taking to heart, like, not giving up on things. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just in like putting work into it, especially with this podcast, man. Like, I'm never going to give up on this. I put in so much work to like keep it going, and it's fun. And, you know, getting to talk to people like you, man, that's why I enjoy doing this. I don't give a shit if I have like 5 downloads or 1,000. Like, right. It's just fun.
And that's the crazy thing, you know, I think about this format, because like I have a pretty long history with YouTube. Prior to any of this, just making all sorts of videos, you know, trying tons of different formats. I just enjoy having a camera in my hands and creating. But, you know, like my personal YouTube channel has like 500 subscribers. It's like it's nothing to write home about, but it's just a way for me to be able to have an outlet. You know, just because music isn't there doesn't mean I don't have an outlet.
Yeah.
And so that's been huge for me. But on top of that, if you hold yourself to a standard where you're constantly pushing where you are, where you're constantly pushing the boundary, trying to become the best version of you can be, you're going to succeed. You know, you're going to succeed. It might not even be this that you succeed at, but because you're doing this, it might open up the door to something else. You know, half the people that I know that have found their way into bands ended up in these bands not because of being super well connected, but just saying yes to the right things at the right time. George Schmidt from Stick to Your Guns is a good buddy of ours. He's from here in Kansas City.
I toured with them 2009.
Okay, so the way that George got into the band is the perfect example of just saying yes. Another band from here in Kansas City said, hey, our van broke down, and he was in a band here called Snake Eater. And they're like, hey, can we use your van to do the show up in Iowa? It's with the Bronx, Every Time I Die, Stick to Your Guns, I think. And he's like, yeah, fuck it, but I have to drive, you know, because of the insurance stuff, so I'm going to go. I'll come with. They're like, fine. So he goes up and he's like, hey, I'll just do merch. He just sits behind the merch table with a little drum pad in his hands. And the singer of Stick to Your Guns comes up to him and says, hey, so-and-so told me that you're a really good drummer. And he's like, yeah, I mean, I can play. He's like, hey, can you come outside and talk to me for a second? Goes outside. And the singer of Stick to Your Guns says, our drummer's flying home in 2 days. This is unexpected, but we need somebody who can play this set. Do you honestly think you can do this? And would you be willing to? And he's just like, yeah, I can do that. You know, it's like something out of a fucking Hollywood movie. But he put himself in the right places so many times and practiced his ass off being a good fucking drummer, one of the best drummers I've seen live, and made him a commodity, made himself a commodity, that when the opportunity arose, he was a good enough musician that could learn the set in 2 nights and realistically fill the part. And then after that was done, they're like, hey, you're also a cool dude, you just want to be in the band, so when you hear things like that happen, ask yourself why you're not putting yourself out there. Ask yourself why you're sitting on your couch. Ask yourself why that thing you've wanted to do, that podcast, that YouTube channel, that song you wanted to write. Ask yourself why you're not doing that. Life can swallow us whole. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So if you don't put yourself in these situations, if you don't put yourself out there, you're just gonna end up in the same fucking spot over and over again.
Yeah,
So,
I got super lucky the same way, man. I just said yes to doing like merch, and that turned into like crew work and more merch, and still touring for like 5 years. And it was like, yeah, if I didn't say yes to it, knowing there was going to be no stability in doing so, I wouldn't have got a chance to meet like all these cool people and travel everywhere. And sometimes like I don't really think much of it, and then I talk to people about it and they're like, wait, you did what? And I'm like, yeah, I don't know, I just kind of did this thing. And they're like, you realize like not a lot of people get to do that. And then I have to like remind myself of that, like, oh yeah, I know that's right, a lot of people don't get to do that shit. So I don't know, I don't take it for granted, but I also don't like sit here and like fucking brag about it either, because it's just like it was just a thing that I did,
Right. Well, and I think that's the thing too, is if like it's I definitely. It's easy to like lose your humility. It's easy to let pride take over. But one thing I'll definitely say is there's certain things that you do in life that you can't relay to people. You can't talk to people about it. Mm-hmm. And it's not because people are lesser or better or whatever than you. But there is something to be said about when you come home off of a year where you spent 9 months on the road, and you've lived off of Taco Bell dollar menu items, and you rarely shower, and you are tan like a day laborer and just miserable. And you go and have a conversation with somebody that's never ever experienced that before, and they say that they want to hear everything, and very very quickly it becomes, I just wanted to hear the good bits. You can probably shut up now.
Yeah.
And and it's I'm not even saying it's necessarily jealousy. I think it's just it's a matter of unrelatability. Yeah,
they just don't get like what it means to do that.
Right. And there's all sorts of factors involved in that, but I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine who was also a musician, but he'd never toured. He was like a worship leader. Mm-hmm. And just the conversation got pretty stale within just a couple minutes, because he truly did want to know how I was doing, and I don't discredit his motives, but it just became not the conversation he wanted to have very quickly. And when you get two people on the same page, you have a conversation like what we're having right now, where there's common ground. And I think that's been definitely a problem in my life. And we talked about earlier about having so many friends that live all around the country. One, you also appreciate the conversations you do get to have, because that so many of your friends are so far away. But additionally, you appreciate when you get to have these conversations. I guess that's just the end of it. Is you're somebody who, though I don't know you, we don't have a history together. We have shared history. We've been to the same places. We've probably pissed in the same parking lots.
Yeah, probably.
Been in the same truck stops. And there's a lot to be said about that. And like, a hugely important thing is also the I was talking to somebody here at Plug Your Holes about this earlier. The more you travel, the more different kinds of people you see, the more you see everyone differently. And when you know your own. So I know when I'm talking to somebody that has shared experiences, shared life, that we have a lot of common ground to talk about. And this is not going to get boring. But to somebody who, their number one concern is figuring out the worship song schedule and like what Perkins they're going to go to that night after, worship practice, it's a little different. Our priorities are different. I understand, and I can understand that the conversation isn't necessarily going to have the same arc that a conversation like you and I might have.
Yeah. What's funny too is I was checking out a few videos from like you guys, like whether it was live or recorded stuff, and then I came across a video of you guys in the van, and you're all sitting there talking about the pee jugs, and I was like, fucking pee jugs. Like, people don't even understand when you have like a 12-hour drive and you don't want to stop, so everybody just pees in a jug.
Yeah. Oh yeah, dude, constantly. I've had the misfortine of being in a couple bands with extreme bathroom takers and extreme pee. Like, so one bandmate of mine was pee shy, so we always had to stop for him. Actually, I've had two bandmates that have been like that over the years. But another one was one particular band member who just didn't give a fuck about anything. And at one point in time, shit in a Triscuits box because he just didn't want to get out of the van. It just gets a little extreme. Or when you slam on the brakes and like 46 pee bottles come rolling to the front of the van.
Oh man.
That shit is just it's a little too much. But it is what it is, and everybody who's been in that situation knows. We've all been there. And if you haven't pissed in the bottle, your fucking guitar player has.
Yeah, it took me a little while to do it. I was like, wait, you guys really don't stop for bathroom breaks? Like, they're like, nah, man, you just got to find a bottle and go. And I was like, all right, well, and I am the serial pisser. Like, I'm the one that has to piss the most all the time because I'm always drinking water and, I was always drinking beer. So it's just like, I'm going to fill up like 3 of those fuckers a night. Like, this is not going to be good. So, yeah.
Well, and the other thing I think about being in a band too is like laws. Like, there's some point in being in a band on tour where laws become more suggestions than the rule. And so, like things like drinking in the van, fucking fireworks, BB guns, anything to keep you mildly entertained, regardless of its legal questionability. And I've never been like much of a drug person. Mm-hmm. Like I'll drink and maybe occasionally I'll smoke some weed or something. But like and back in the Christian band days, I didn't even drink, so I'm basically just chronically bored. And so it was like Walmart at 4 a.m, BB gun, that sounds good. Or any number of things, slingshots and old batteries. We used to take, this is not good, so nobody do this. And I'm sorry, this is a young me. But I used to take a wrist rocket slingshot and take 2 AA batteries. And every time we'd pass a car dealership, just launch them into a car dealership parking lot.
Oh, shit.
And just be like, where they'll land? Nobody knows. But, and that's totally juvenile, jackass, 23, 22-year-old shit. Fortunately, the statute of limitations is probably up on that, so I can talk about it.
Yeah.
But you just constantly are looking for something to do. And I know with no one to speak of, we would just find tons of time with a video camera and we'd hook up like a karaoke system through the van speakers, and we'd sing like Michael McDonald and Crash Test Dummies and shit like that, and just for fun. We put it on YouTube, but we don't give a shit if anybody watched it. It's for us to watch. You guys can fuck off.
Yeah, and especially back then, cell phones weren't super prevalent, so you couldn't be on your phone all the time. Like, you brought books, or maybe somebody figured out how to rig up a laptop so everybody could watch movies and shit on the van. And sometimes, yeah. And highly suspect. I think I remember definitely being the only guy in the band having a phone really early on. But I remember the first band that we went on tour with that had a sidekick. If you remember, like the original sidekicks. And it blew my fucking mind that I could like answer my email and I could check AOL Instant Messenger and all this stuff. And the worst part about it is Duluth, Minnesota. You could only get them on T-Mobile, and Duluth, Minnesota didn't have T-Mobile. So it took like years until something comparable came out that I could get on like Sprint or something like that. And I think it was like a Palm 750 or Palm 650 or something. But now looking back, I'm like, my iPhone 10 could fucking destroy that thing. So it's like the things I'm capable to do every single day on my phone is just mind blowing. But then I remember being on tour, in one of the recent podcasts on my channel, I talked about, we didn't have GPS. We get to a town. I remember very distinctly going to Decatur, Alabama, and finding the first payphone I could see and ripping the map page out of the phone book so that I could like navigate the town and figure out the grid system of that particular town. And that's just what you had to do, because an atlas typically didn't have small cities. Every once in a while you'd end up with a big city in an atlas like Chicago or something, but they just didn't have any navigable like way to get to the actual venue without experience or somebody to write you like play-by-play directions. Yeah, I think it was on the tail end of that because I guess I got lucky. Like the 2 bands that I was with, they just had gotten GPSs. Like they invested money into getting one, and they were so expensive. But man, did they help
like
out.
$700. It's like fucking insane.
Yeah, and it was
now,
nice.
And now you think of like a GPS. If somebody has a GPS thing in their car, you're like, what the fuck is that? Like, do you not have a phone? Yeah. Like the only one we ever had to buy, like the only one we've bought in really ever was one of the years we did Warped Tour. You need a special GPS for trucking routes for clearance, for height clearances. Oh. And so we had to buy an actual like trucker grade GPS unit that could tell us if, bridges were too low or if like you can't drive in this turnpike or something like that. And that's the only thing I can see using it for, but there's got to be an app for that now, right?
Yeah, I would assume so. I don't know for sure, but it fucking wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. I mean, there's an app for everything. You can buy plugs on the Plug Your Holes app. You can probably get a fucking GPS to get you around bridges.
Yeah, so the Plug Your Holes thing, that's one of the things I wanted to talk about. How did going from the band kind of lead into getting Plug Your Holes started?
Okay. Well, that tour that I mentioned before with the Day to Remember, I don't remember exactly how I came across them. I don't know if it was like just old plugs of mine. It had to be something else. I had to buy them from some wholesaler. Mm-hmm. But I had a bunch of plugs. A couple of the guys in Didn't Remember were stretching. A couple of guys in Blessed by Broken Heart were stretching. Random people at random shows were stretching. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to sell some plugs. I'm going to keep some on me and sell them to people on tour. I did this in my next band as well. It kind of like helped supplement my income a little bit, $20 here, $20 there. And I got home after that Bay and Jamestown story, and I came home middle of the summer. I started selling advertising with my good buddy Winter, who was the drummer in two of the bands I've mentioned. Mm-hmm. And we were selling basically Yellow Page ads. And I've always been an all right salesman at regular, like normal people. But when you're selling Yellow Page ads, you're selling to another business. And businesses know three things guaranteed. One of them is they know that you don't know anything about their business. Two, they know that if they needed it, they'd come after you. Whether they're right or wrong in this one, every business knows this. Mm-hmm. And three, they also know that they don't need to be taking advice from some 23-year-old kid with full sleeves. So, like, I instantly walk into some auto body, and, like, some guy named Rick comes out of the back who's 65 years old and basically is just like, you're an idiot, get the fuck out. So, in, like, 2 or 3 months, I managed to sell something like $1,000. Like I make $1,000 in commission over the course of, like, months. So I'm averaging something like maybe $90 a week. Nothing worth bragging about. Yeah. And I'm busting my ass. I'm out there 10 hours a day, putting a ton of miles on my wife and I's car. My wife's working at a Perkins at night. She's making okay money, but it sucks. It just sucks. And there's no bands on the horizon. So I'm like, okay, I need to figure something out. So the book goes into print in like September, I think. And I say to myself in the 4 months before that job starts back up that I have to have something else going before then. So I had a bunch of airsoft guns and some other stuff sold on eBay. Used some of that money to pre-order 4 PlayStation 3s when they came out, 4 or 5 Nintendo Wiis, a bunch of 10th anniversary Tickle Me Elmos.
Damn.
I sell all that on eBay. So at this point, the website's already started as I'm doing. Like, I already have a website up. PlugYourHoles.com exists like as of September 27th, 2006. And I wasn't in Knowings yet. So I just sort of start pushing to my friends, trying to get like a Day to Remember to post about it on their MySpace, which they fucking amazingly did a lot. And getting in contact with other bands, and even using my band's old MySpace and things like that. And by the time I'd sold all those things at eBay, I'd had enough money to kind of build up the amount of inventory we had. The holidays hit, Black Friday hit, all that stuff. By December, I was making more money than I did the entire time. And like I was making probably the best money I'd ever made in my life already within 3 or 4 months. Maybe not the best money I've ever made, but pretty damn good. And so I just, like, it was pretty crystal clear. My wife and I had a conversation. It was like, I'm not going back, period. Fast forward a few months. And, not even a few months. Before we were even really making money, I'd been fortunate enough to have a meeting with Kevin Lyman, the founder and owner of Warped Tour.
Yeah.
I had a meeting with him about a band, that soft band I played bass for. We managed to play a little bit of Warped Tour in the summer of 2006 and had a meeting, or at least we're talking with one of his labels. I don't remember if it was WarCon or the other one. And so I had his contact. So I was like, I'm going to email Kevin Lyman and just be like, yo, this is that guy from that band. Can my company come on your tour? Thinking he might be like, cool, come do the Minnesota date, or here's a handful of dates. He replies to me within minutes And it's just like, you're cleared to do the entire thing. Here's introductions, meet so and so. And I was just like, holy shit. Damn. I just got all of Warped Tour for 2007. And instantly, being the kind of person I am, I'm the jump into the pool without any idea how to swim or any, you know. And so instantly I'm like, how the fuck are we going to do that? So, you know, because the tour starts in San Diego, it ends in California. I'm in Minnesota. It costs a lot of money to travel. I'm thinking, like, how the fuck? Like, I'm like, all right, I own a Suburban, but the Suburban's going to be killing me in gas.
Ooh, yeah.
So a good buddy of mine and I, at the same time, we're opening a venue called the Knockout in Minnesota, and that didn't last a super long time. It was open less than a year. But he came to me, and at the same time, I'm starting to do knowing stuff, and we're starting to tour. And this good buddy of mine, Joe Zimmer, who's still one of my best friends to this day, he lives in Toronto now. He comes to me, he's like, hey, I have this little car that gets crazy gas mileage. I've always wanted to go on tour and do something like this. How about me and Laura go do the tour in my car? And we'll crank it out so you can keep doing knowings and the venue all summer long. I'm like, oh, okay, this sounds like super stressful. Fine, okay. So we do it. We get everything prepped to go out on the road with them. We have no fucking idea what we're doing, and I cannot stress that enough. Zero fucking idea. There's no YouTube video about how to do Warped Tour. Even to this day, there probably isn't a good one.
Yeah.
And, like the idea of like getting out there. So I go buy an Easy Up tent. We shove it in the back of that tiny fucking car. Bunch of tables, all of our products, some banners, whatever. We're like, okay, how bad can it be? But I send them with an envelope that they're not allowed to open with $500 in it. It says, if shit hits the fan, this is your last $500. So if you need to come home, this is this. You do not touch this for anything. So I'm thinking, man, because if it really goes to shit, I'll know within the first 3 days, maybe. So basically, I just gave them a 3-day trip to fucking California and like a super stressful drive home. Mm-hmm. But fine, we'll recover. It'll be fine. And sure enough, for the first 3 days, we're really, really good. At least better than we expected. Almost double what we expected. Certainly double what we needed to make to justify being out there. And it was pretty clear that Warped Tour was a really good avenue for promoting the company and everything else. We met 1 million friends out there every year. We meet 1 million more. It's a really good opportunity for a brand like ours to see our customers face to face, and meet a lot of the bands that we know. Like being in the scene. Like I wasn't in the same scene as Bless the Fall, but they've become friends. Regardless, because of something like Warped Tour, where everybody comes together. So that was super huge. And then from there, it's just been kind of like continual growth. And then 6.5 years ago, we moved from being in Minnesota to being in Kansas City, and we actually just moved into our biggest warehouse yet. It's almost. I'm walking back and forth in it right now, and it's dauntingly large compared to anything I've ever been in before. But we just moved in like a month ago, and so this is our 3rd or 4th warehouse down here, and that's kind of the history of Plug Your Holes in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's funny too, man. Like I don't have stretch ears or anything like that, but I know people that do are very, very particular about the jewelry that they put in their ears.
Sure, for sure.
So, that's something that's never going to go away there. I think you guys have like a solid business model there, because people are always going to be particular about their jewelry and want the best or like the certain kind of thing. And that's that I never understood doing it, but I knew people that, like they went up to like the inch or like tried doing it themselves and blew their ears out. And
right.
It's so interesting to me seeing people do it. But
I think I very much remember the moment I wanted to. And it was, I'm kind of like, once again, leap before look. I worked at a church camp when I was like 17. I was a cook in the kitchen. And as opposed to being a cook somewhere other than the kitchen, and so were two of my bandmates. So it was kind of our summer thing before. This was the summer before I started touring.
Okay.
And I knew from the moment I saw tattoos that I wanted tattoos. And I was like 6 years old when I saw that. So it took me a long time to get to the point where I could get them, but I knew instantly I wanted them. And when I never was a huge fan of piercings. I think I got my ears pierced when I was like 12 or something, just cause. But this dude at that camp who also worked there, I think he was like an assistant counselor or something. His name is Eben, like with a B, as in boy. So that was kind of his name has always stuck out. And he had stretched ears, something not very big. I mean, by like, to me then, because I could just see through it, it was huge. But by standards now, it's probably it's probably 0 or 00 or something small.
Yeah,
something like the size of a pen maybe. And I just knew instantly. I'm like, I'm gonna stretch my ears, and I had to do that weekend. Like we had every like Saturday, like basically kids didn't get there till like late Sunday, and they left early Saturday, so we had that window of like all Saturday night basically to go into town and buy anything we wanted. So I remember going to a mall in like Brainerd, Minnesota, which if you've never heard of Brainerd, Minnesota, there's a reason, because nobody's ever heard of Brainerd, Minnesota except for people that live in Brainerd, Minnesota. So anyway, we go into town, go to some mall, hoping there'd be like a, I don't know, Hot Topic or something. There wasn't. There's a Spencer's, and I start finding things that I can put in my ears. I don't know if I'd call it jewelry, but I start the stretching process. Eventually, a couple weekends later, we go back to my hometown for the weekend, and I pick some more stuff up there. And that kind of just started out. But there's never been like some people have this weird relationship with body jewelry or weird relationship with tattoos.
Mm-hmm.
Mine's not like that. I just like the way they look. Not a big fan of piercings. I had my lips pierced at one point in time when I was trying to be super cool and look like I was an Avenged Sevenfold. But honestly, like piercings have never been a thing for me. But having my ears stretched, there's no thing like I do it because it like centers me.
Yeah.
It's more of like this thing. I just like the way it looks. I think that regular earrings on dudes look fucking dumb, and I wanted something that was more meaty and like substantial. I'm also a big guy, so like it kind of makes sense that I'd have bigger plugs. So I stretched up to an inch over a couple of years, and I just left it, and that's where I stayed. It's just a thing I like. But if somebody has another meaning for why they do it, that's great. But for me, it was just a thing. It's just something I like.
Yeah, I never got into piercings myself either. Like, same as you, like, I had my lips pierced at one point in time, but then one got ripped out at a show, and I was like, well, I'm fucking done with that. And then I went all in on tattoos, so I'm, like, covered in tattoos, and that's where that feels best to me. I'd rather have art on my body than a piece of metal sticking out of it, but that's just me.
Right, no, absolutely.
I don't have the discipline for it either. Like, stretching up like that, it takes a lot of discipline, and I just don't have it.
So the funny thing having the job that I have, I see what the discipline when somebody who doesn't have discipline, what it looks like. So we get tons of pictures of people who just are fucking their ears up. Dude, they're fucking their ears up like it's a sport.
Oh, dude.
And just doing just nasty shit and wondering why their ears hurt and why their ears are all inflamed. Our customer service team could probably put out an entire video about like just the fucked up things that they see. Like, hey, does this look infected? Like, the reply is go to the doctor. Like, you need to seek medical attention immediately.
Yeah.
So discipline, yes, it definitely takes discipline to do it the right way. The unfortunate thing is even the people that are doing it, a lot of times they're not using discipline. They're just shoving shit in their ears. And I've made a whole series of videos on the Plug Your Holes YouTube about how not to be a fucking moron with your ears, because they're going to be there. Like I say this all the time, they're going to be there the rest of your life.
Yep.
Why fuck them up right now? Just be patient, goddammit.
Yeah, I worked in a Hot Topic for a couple of years, and like the amount of people that would come in with fucked up ears and just buy like this shitty jewelry and make it worse. It's just like we'd have to like literally sit them down and be like, do not buy this jewelry. Go to a doctor. Like you were saying, it looks bad. Like they just don't care. I had another.
No, it's an instant gratification element to it. You're just doing it. So you do it right now, and I mean, I'm sure we're all guilty of it. And I think as the younger you are, the less self control you have. But it doesn't mean that it's just not a good idea. Just don't do it.
I've had other people I knew too that stretched up like really, really big, and then they got their lobes sewn back up and never looked back. That was always interesting to me too, especially like the amount of time it took to get it like that freaking huge. And then they're like, I'm done. I don't want it anymore. It's like, well, why'd you do it in the first place?
Yeah, and like, dude, I know a ton of people have had that happen too. I mean, even some guys in some bands and stuff. Like, I remember like Chris, the drummer from Bayside. He's like that. I mean, he was up over an inch, and a couple of years ago he sewed his up, and I have nothing against that. Like, I don't care. It's just one of those things where he clearly changed his mind on what he thought looked cool, and I have no problem with that at all. I clearly don't have a problem with that, as I do not wear girl jeans anymore. So therefore, I have also changed something that I no longer think looks cool, and that's okay. That's called evolving.
Yeah, I remember that fad too. That was a weird. I could wear skinny jeans, but it's because like I'm a small dude, but I'm not wearing girls' jeans. But all my friends did, and I was just like, well, works for you guys.
Dude, when I wore girl jeans in the early 2000s, I looked like I was trying to smuggle like meat from a fucking butcher. It was just everything was just squeezed in there as tight as it could get, and my fucking my nuts would be split up and down the middle, so I'd have a camel toe, just one testicle on each side of the hem. It wasn't flattering by any stretch of the imagination, but I sure enjoyed being called faggot all the time.
Oh yeah, gosh, man, that was especially in like the smaller southern towns, like no holds bar racial or not racial, sexual slurs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
Even now, man, like, it's 2018 and I just moved back here to Chattanooga, and like my hair's purple and I get these looks all the time, and I just know people want to say something, but because it's 2018, they can't really say anything.
yeah.
But I see it in their eyes, man.
Being from North. Oh yeah, no, constantly. Like people just like some of them are just curious. My wife has purple hair, and some people get a little weird about it. But growing up in northern Minnesota, where everybody is like a hockey player, hockey players are basically looking for any excuse to call you a faggot at any point in time during the day, and we'll pretty much do it for things that don't even make sense. But that's the number one. That's their go-to. And being a bunch of dudes wearing the tightest pants, the tightest shirts, flat ironing my hair, circa 2005. So you get a lot of shit, but whatever, fuck it. I was experimenting. Leave me alone.
Yeah. The way I look at it too is like they don't have to wear it, so what does it matter? Like I'm the one wearing it.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. It's always been a super annoying thing, just for somebody to say, I don't like the way you look. Fuck you. It's just so stupid. But hey, that's people do that. That's pretty much like I think that's kind of like the foundation of our society right there. Is said in the most simple terms, our society is based on hockey players telling band guys to fuck off. And because we when you identify, so this is one thing that really I know we're getting really long winded, so I'll end on this if you want to.
Yeah, it's all good.
When I lived in Thailand, one thing that became crystal fucking clear to me is that when you live in a place where you're the minority, you will be friends with anyone who looks like you or talks like you. And it sounds insane because, like, you think of the standard of people. Like, you go into a bar tonight, let's say. You go to a bar, 175 people in there, all getting shit-faced, a couple people sitting by themselves, a bunch of people in groups, people playing pool, people playing darts. Cool. How many of them are you going to go up and talk to and be like, hey, you want to be my friend? Like it's fucking kindergarten?
Yeah.
Probably zero. You're probably going to sit there and drink like a fucking loser by yourself because that's what people do. That's the healthy thing to do. And until your friends show up. Or by happenstance, maybe somebody will see that you have like a I don't know, like a fucking Eagles shirt on and be like, Eagles, yeah, whatever, fine. But when you're in another country where nobody speaks English, or the English that they do speak is very bad, there's no context to an American or English style conversation. The humors are all off and the cadence is all off and everything turns to shit. And so you go to a bar and you'll be like, oh, that guy kind of looks like me and he's watching football. I'm going to go talk to that guy. And you just end up like your standard, not necessarily like you have high standards living in America for who you will be a friend with, but you certainly have like expectations and preconceived ideas, especially when you've had like, you toured and all this stuff and, maybe you'll think you're too cool for school. But when you're surrounded by people that are nothing like you, somebody who's even 10% like you is good enough because you're like, God damn it, I just want to have a beer with somebody and talk about fucking football. And that's like a perfect example is this guy named Andrew who owns a bar on Sukhumvit Road in Bangkok. And if you're ever in Bangkok, go to the bar of the game and slap Andrew, he's the fattest motherfucker in there, slap him in the nuts for me and tell him that Sam said, hey. But my friend Doug and I, who lives in Thailand as well, we made really good friends with this guy, not because we have all that much in common, but just because we're Americans and we just wanted to talk. And he's this big fucking dude from Boston, and he's the thickest Boston accent. I'm like, how could you live here for 10 years and not be rid of that fucking accent already? But we'll talk and it'll just we'll just bullshit in a way that you feel like you're back at home. And I think that's that weird thing of like we try so hard to latch on to people like us. There's a really good book called Tribe that talks about that a lot, and the idea that we just don't like things that don't look like us. But when you're surrounded by things that truly don't look like you, you're willing to accept any element of someone that looks like you or sounds like you. I think that's kind of an interesting thing. But when you have an entire team of hockey players to go around and like beat up people with, I don't know what they do for fun. You don't even think about the fact that like this person on the other end of this person is like somebody that's worth talking to, that there's any worth there. But if you're the last hockey player on earth, some dude with fucking eyeliner and tight jeans might be a hell of a lot better than the alternatives. And I think that's like lost on a lot of people. We just make these impulsive decisions about who we deem cool and not cool. It's kind of fucking dumb.
Yeah, societal constructs, man. They're the weirdest fucking things. I I don't know. I'm already like an anxious person anyway, so like trying to like do anything socially is like fucking hard.
Yeah, I can definitely. I've always had this like weird thing where I can get on stage and it never bothers me. I can go to a podcast. I can pretty much do anything like that. But you put me in a room with like 3 people, and I'm like, oh fuck, what do I do? I don't know any of these people. Shit.
Yeah.
Oh god, they're just thinking about how I'm sweating. I gotta go, and that's it. It's like I'm not even afraid, but it's just that internal dialogue of like, fuck, being here right now. But if I were to be in a room of 1,000 people and I'm the center of attention, then I know that I know my purpose. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's like something, and even being behind the tent at Warped Tour, when I'm behind the tent, I have purpose. I'm here for a reason. I'm here to sell you plugs. I'm here to talk to you about this or that. But when I'm out and I no longer have a purpose, then that's when like anxiety gets a little weird. And it's a super weird thing. I choose to ignore it as often as possible, but it doesn't mean that my brain isn't telling me that I'm a fucking loser. I think that's one of those things that like everybody goes through, and I think everybody needs to hear that. Like even people that you might look up to, dude, think they're losers all the time. That's real life shit. Trying to overcome the feeling of feeling like a loser is like half of life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, it's a battle. I mean, I've definitely, getting older, it's like, man, why do I care about all this stuff? That used to make me so anxious, but I do, and I'm trying to get out of it, but it just takes time. Yeah.
But dude, it's all you can do. It's all you can do is try. You just gotta keep on keeping on and keep putting out badass fucking podcasts. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's the thing that helps the most too, is like I'm constantly talking to strangers or like people I don't know, or like people I kind of know or met like a couple times, and it's like, oh well, like I know how to talk to people, like this is dumb.
Right, no, absolutely. And like I think the reason podcasts are even so popular, and I'm not sure how many you listen to, but I think one of the reasons, and I've listened to a few. But I think the reason they become so popular is because so many of us are lacking conversation in our daily lives. We work with people we hate. We go to school with people we hate. We turn on the radio or TV and it's shit we hate. It's like, well, I want to listen to somebody talk about some shit that I want to hear. So I'm going to go listen to, like a good one for music stuff is Labeled, the Tooth and Nail one, or I'll listen to my buddy Wes's podcast, Strange House. And, because it's people that I know that are on the show, or conversations that I might be having if I had that kind of person in my life to talk to. And now I'm in this incredibly amazing spot where I work with people that are so interesting at Plug Your Holes that they are all probably going to be guests on the podcast, because every one of them is very good at conversation, and that's a very awesome thing to have. But a lot of people are not in that boat. Kyle, who I went out to lunch with today, worked at a place before this where if you said anything that even remotely contradicted Donald Trump, you were basically were just called out as being like some kind of fucking hippie douchebag. Mm-hmm. And you're like, dude, nobody wants to work in that environment. When you would drive into that, you have your 30-minute drive in or your 30-minute drive home, and you're just like, God damn it, I fucking hate these people. I just want to murder every fucking one of them. Or even if it's not murderous, you just have so much contempt towards like just working with the shitty people you work with. And you get there and you're like, hi, David, how was your weekend? Haha, fishing. I don't care. And you have a little bit of reprieve in the idea that I can listen to some guy talk about metal, or talk about bow hunting, or talk about science, or talk about comic book collections from 1963, or whatever the fuck it is. Like, dude, I found the most random ass podcasts just through trying to be a member of the podcast community. Mm-hmm. One of them is, I was just asking if anybody's based out of Kansas City, because I like to do my podcasts in person.
Yeah.
And the one guy that replied was, yeah, I do. Me and a buddy of mine are two 50-year-old non-gay males who do a weekly Dawson's Creek recap podcast. And I just stood there, like, looking at my phone from the text message and being like, I guess there really is everything.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're doing a weekly episodic podcast about a show that doesn't exist. That's intense. That is an intense level of shit that I didn't think could be out there. And for those of you who are looking for a Dawson's Creek weekly episodic podcast, it's called Creek of the Week. And I highly recommend checking it out. Because if you are into that, you have to be the absolute niche of niche. And I love that. I absolutely love that you can get away from the garbage of your day and just Dawson's Creek the fuck out of it.
Yeah, no, dude, there's something for everything. Like I listen to like probably like 30 different podcasts, and I'll listen to them depending on what kind of mood I'm in, what I want to listen to, that I want to learn about. And it's just like there's something for everything, and it's so great. But yeah, I never really thought about it that way. The fact that people listen to him is because they're not getting those conversations elsewhere. And it's like, oh, that is why I listen to him, because nobody I know wants to talk about shit like this.
Right, absolutely, absolutely. But think of how many, especially if you live in small town America, think of how much you could be expanding your life. Like, this conversation would have never happened organically if you lived in fucking Decatur, Illinois.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like, this isn't a conversation. If you are this kind of person and live in Danville or Decatur, Illinois, you're the only one. That sucks. Like, you know, like, you are the one person who would have wanted to have this conversation, and unfortunately, you probably spend most of your life having it with yourself. And even coming from my hometown growing up, that was me a lot of times, is I'm the only one having this conversation. And it wasn't until I started touring and all this other stuff that conversations started to like happen like this. But that's what podcasting is for so many people, even not even just the people listening, but the people on as well. It is it's a way to get out your thoughts in a clear and concise manner that is enjoyable to listen to, and have a real fucking conversation, intentional conversation. Like, outside of podcasting, when was the last time you had an intentional conversation? Called somebody up with the intention of talking to them for hours.
It's been a while, that's for sure.
And I bet you the average person listening to this would say the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm not any better. I think all myself. I'm gonna call one of my best friends when I was a kid, Eric. I'm gonna call him. I'm gonna see how he's doing. And then like 3 days go by, and I've completely forgot about the fact that I was gonna call Eric. You know, it's we get so wrapped up in this shit. You know, and maybe we should put the podcast down. Sometimes maybe we should be having more conversations, but in the meantime, it's at least a substitute for the conversations we're not having, I think.
I think that is a perfect sentiment to kind of close out on, though, too, man. That's perfect for what we try to aim for. And
awesome. Plus, my headphones are going to die soon.
Yeah. Okay. So the last thing, just dude, let people know where they can find you and follow you, and like, well, obviously we'll link to all that stuff when we post the episode, but you know, when they're listening to it as well, so they remember.
Yeah, thanks so much for that. I do a podcast called Blood, Sweat, and Beers. We're 4 episodes in as of recording this, but I think there'll probably be more out by the time you put this up.
Yeah.
You can find that on iTunes, Stitcher, Overcast, the Google Play Store, and Podbean. It has a logo that has a beer and something else. What the hell's the other thing in that logo? Something. Axe, maybe? I don't know. But it's like a bluish logo. You'll dig it. Subscribe and like that. Review it for me if you can. And other than that, plug your holes. If you like making your parents angry, plug your holes is the place to be. Your outlet on parental frustration since 2006.
Awesome, dude. Well, seriously, thank you for taking the time to do this. I definitely appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Thank you. Thank you for taking the time, man. I'm just another dude. So I'm always thankful for any time anybody gives me.
Party on, dudes!